Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Matte. Thank you so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content. This week, we'll be talking about Iran. Is Trump going to bomb or will diplomacy succeed? There has been a round of talks in Geneva that apparently went not bad. And so we'll see if another U.S. intervention for the very same kind that Trump claimed he was against when he ran for office will be avoided. And we'll be speaking to Alizadeh, who is an Iranian political analyst, all about that and what's happening inside of Iran as the country faces the threat of a Trump regime change war. But first, we do a weekly recap segment called the Friday Free-for-All. It's for our paid subscribers. If you're a free subscriber, here is a preview. The big question hanging over the world right now is whether Trump, the guy who campaigned against endless wars, especially in the Middle East, is about to launch another endless war in the Middle East, assembling the largest U.S. military deployment in the Middle East since the Iraq War, threatening to bomb Iran. They're having these talks in Geneva, indirectly between the U.S. and Iran. Reportedly, as we're recording this, at least the Iranian side says that they've gone positively, so we'll see where that goes. But the Trump administration is still very much talking as if it wants to go to war, because it sounds a lot like how the Bush administration sounded when they were making the case to go to war with Iraq, claiming there's a big threat that we have to stop. Steve Witkoff just a few days ago said that Iran is a week away from having enough uranium for a bomb. And here is Vice President J.D. Vance picking up the baton when it comes to fear-mongering over Iran's supposed nuclear ambitions.
But the principle is very simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. And in fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem, as the president has said repeatedly, he wants to address that problem diplomatically. But of course, the president has other options as well.
So Vance is saying, kind of like Witkoff did, that Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon, even though, of course, as we've talked about endlessly, the U.S. intelligence consensus is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. And here's even Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, contradicting Vance, because while Vance claims there's evidence Iran is seeking a nuclear weapon, here's Marco Rubio admitting that Iran is not even enriching any uranium at all.
That Iran poses a very grave threat to the United States and has for a very long time. They are in possession, first and foremost, after their nuclear program was obliterated. They were told not to try to restart it, and here they are. You can see them always trying to rebuild elements of it. They're not enriching right now, but they're trying to get to the point where they ultimately can.
So they're a week away from having enough uranium for a bomb, but yet they're not even enriching right now. And we've seen evidence that they have a nuclear weapons program. It's all very confusing. And at least the Bush administration, when they were trying to claim, lied that Iran has Iraq WMDs, I don't recall this many internal contradictions.
Yeah, they were pretty on message. Well, Aaron, it may seem like there are some contradictions and a little bit of mission creep or message deviation, but someone who explains it really well is Oklahoma Senator Republican Markwayne Mullin. Let's hear what he had to say to CNN's Caitlin Collins about the state of Iranian nuclear enrichment.
So as long as the Ayatollah is going to continue to try to rebuild the system that he said he wasn't going to do. That's why we ended the 12-day war, because they said they were done trying to build a nuclear weapon, yet they're obviously trying to rebuild it.
Right.
We're not going to let that happen.
If we obliterated it, we being the United States last summer, then why are you worried about it right now?
Because they're rebuilding it, and you can see them rebuilding it.
But it was
not
obliterated.
Enriching. Well, but it doesn't mean you can't rebuild. I mean, people have car accidents and obliterate their bones and their legs, and yet they can still put, metal back in them and walk again.
But I think if it was obliterated in June, how is it February, and we're now, as Steve Witkoff put it, a week away from Iran having this?
I don't know. I can't speak for Steve. I haven't got those reports.
All right. So he can't speak for Steve, but what he can speak for is that you can get into a car accident and your bones can get crushed and you can rebuild said bones out of metal. And that is very similar to how Iran, after losing all of its nuclear potential, is able to, within months, be a nuclear threat.
There's another problem with what he's saying here. He says that the Ayatollah said, okay, fine, we're done building a nuclear weapon. That's what he claimed the Ayatollah said after the June Israeli U.S. attack. The Ayatollah never said that because they weren't building a nuclear weapon. So there was no nuclear weapons program for him to renounce. Like Markwayne Mullin's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, we all remember when the Ayatollah said, I wasn't building a nuclear weapon. No one in Iran ever said that because they're not building a nuclear weapon. So he's saying that they that they abandoned a nuclear weapons program that they never actually had to begin with.
Well, Aaron, maybe you just weren't in on those meetings. And maybe Markwayne Mullin was, because he's very in the know, as you can tell, whether it's about Iranian nuclear enrichment or developments in surgery and car crashes.
Yeah, well, Markwayne Mullin is not only ignorant about the state of Iran's nuclear program, but also about just basic Iranian history, including who its leader is. This is also from his interview with Caitlin Collins.
And to see the rest of that Friday free-for-all, where we go over Dr. Oz's sadistic cuts to the welfare state, John Fetterman's hoodie, Elizabeth Warren's standing O for Trump, and Bill Maher's really bad sense of humor, please join us at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Again, that's usefulidiotspodcast.com.
For this week's interview, we're going to look at the ongoing threat of a U.S. regime change war in Iran and whether diplomacy can possibly succeed even under this war-hungry administration in Washington. Our guest is Ali Alizadeh. He is an Iranian political analyst, the host of Jadal, which is a program that examines international affairs from the standpoint of resistance in West Asia. Ali Alizadeh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
As we're recording this, there's just been a third round of indirect talks held between the U.S. and Iran in Geneva. The Omani foreign minister who is mediating says that there was progress, no word yet from the U.S. side. Based on what you've heard so far, what is your assessment of these talks? And do you think there's a chance of an actual deal being reached?
I hope so, because the other option would be military conflict. What we have to wait a bit. Is very early to say what's going to happen, because what Iran has put on the table is, I believe, is a rational offer to Americans. Americans have claimed they don't want Iran ever reach nuclear weapon, and Iranians have provided something which can give them such guarantee. But then if you just listen to what Americans brought about last night, just before the two sides were supposed to sit on the negotiation table, it seems that they are cheating. Vance talked about the fact that president have all the options on the table, and again, in an indirect way, threatened Iran in a military way. Marco Rubio suddenly, out of sudden, said Iran's missiles, and for the first time ever in the last 47 years, Iran's navy is a threat to the peace and security in the region, to America. I mean, since when Iran's navy has been a threat? Iran has navy in its own waters, which is called Persian Gulf, and it's been called that since 2,500 years ago. And then your navy and your aircraft carrier have come from 15,000 kilometers away to their land. So how can Iranian navy be a threat to your security? And so they are constantly adding pressure and trying to squeeze other things to negotiation, which in my opinion can sabotage the deal. The question is, if Iran and America were sitting on a negotiation table, I think Iran could have given Trump something which was stronger in terms of guarantee than JCPOA, and would send Trump home happy so he could sell it to his people that I did something better than Obama. But is Iran dealing with and negotiating with United States, or is negotiating with Israel? Who is Witkoff? Who is Jared Kushner? Because it seems that Israel has completely different set of agenda, which is constantly pushing Trump. And now Trump, I think, because of his lack of expertise in diplomacy and politics, despite what he thinks of himself, has badly cornered himself, because he came out and said people go on the street and take Iranian institutions, help is coming. So he prepared himself for that, and people like Kane and other generals and chief of staff told him, mate, this is Iran. This is not Iraq or Libya or Syria or any other country. You can't start a war with them and finish it in 24 hours. This is not Venezuela. This is a country which is exporting military capabilities and technology. It's a country which is, as we are talking, is giving new technology to Russia. And you think that you can start a war and finish it in 24 hours. Of course, you can hit Iran hardly and make really kind of strong damages to their infrastructure, but they are not sitting behind in a passive way and watching you. They can open the region into hellfire. And I think what Ayatollah Khamenei said, that this war will be a regional war, made him think twice. So now Trump from one side cannot go back too much because IPAC, Israelis, and Uncle Lindsey, as he called himself, Lindsey Graham, he thinks Iranians call him Uncle Lindsey. They are going to attack him massively. But from the other side, I don't think he's ready to go to war either. The best he can do, in my opinion, is to come up with a deal with Iran and then try to somehow contain Iran, use the factional fighting inside Iran, give some promises of lifting sanctions, and then maybe Israel go to shadow war with Iran, continue campaign of sabotage, assassinations, and finding ways in the gray zone between war and peace. And then maybe Israel wants to attack Iran. Maybe that's the deal between Trump and Netanyahu, because at this stage, I really don't think, I don't see any real options for Trump, which is not going to be humiliating for him.
You mentioned Marco Rubio. Let's go to what he said about the supposed threat that Iran poses to the U.S.
Iran possesses a very large number of ballistic missiles, particularly short-range ballistic missiles that threaten the United States and our bases in the region and our partners in the region. And all of our bases in the UAE, in Qatar, in Bahrain. And they also possess naval assets that threaten shipping and try to threaten the U.S. Navy. So I want everyone to understand that, and beyond just a nuclear program, they possess these conventional weapons that are solely designed to attack America and attack Americans.
What he's doing is conflating America, like the continental United States, where U.S. actually is, with American bases that surround Iran. Because as Rubio knows, none of Iran's missiles can hit the continental U.S. They only can hit, as he says, American bases. So it sounds like what he's saying is Iran is a threat to the U.S. because it exists inside its own sovereign borders, which is surrounded by U.S. bases.
It's a thug on the street which has come so close to your face, trying to create a confrontation, and then he tells you why you're so close to him. Yeah. United States has come, encircled Iran with 26 military bases, and then says your missiles are endangering us. But listen, I mean, if you want to get real, Iran's missile, Iranians have been constraining themselves and limiting the range of their own missile to 2,000 kilometers. Why? Because they don't want to be even a threat to Europe. So in a sense, while Iranians have the technology to make intercontinental missiles, they don't want to do that because there is no beef between Iranians and Europe and Americans in their mind. So who is the problem here? Israel. Israel doesn't want Iran to have missile capability. And that's why the news which came a couple of weeks ago, in which Trump told Netanyahu that we deal with like the nuclear and you deal with the missile yourself. You can go and attack their missile facilities and infrastructure. But the thing is, if Iran doesn't have missile, or its missile capability or its missile range is less than it can hit Israel, what happens? A regime which has just done, in the last 3 years, a genocide in front of everyone's eyes and has 300 to 400 stockpile of nuclear warheads, will be in front of Iran with F-35 that we saw what they can do back in June and July 2025. And Iran has no way of defending itself, because Iran's way of defending itself, Iran's way of, instead of having air defense Iran uses is missiles to create balance and create deterrence. So without that, Iran will be fully vulnerable. So I don't think any state in its sound mind will make itself vulnerable and allow Israel to do to it what they did to Syria after Assad. Iranian state still is there. It still is not like Assad. Whenever you can find a Jolani who can march into Tehran, then maybe you can ask for Iran not to have its missile and you can start bombing its missile arsenal. But until then, still the state still exists and is governing the country. And they are not going to make themselves defenseless. There's a history of being defenseless in Iran. Iran was occupied in First World War, was occupied in Second World War, while in both world wars had announced neutrality. And so Iran was bombed by Iraq and was occupied partially for 8 years. So they understand not having means of basic defense means they are immediately going to be occupied and invaded. So I think it's a fantasy that Netanyahu is selling Trump. And because of all these American taxpayers' money given to Israel, part of that being sent back to the think tanks in Washington and creating this atmosphere of delusion, propaganda, and psyop, some people think Iranian state, as they call, is weak and we can go for it and we can finish it off. I don't think so. It's not possible. Anyone with basic understanding of realpolitik will tell you that this state has immense capabilities of defending itself. And let's look at the pattern of the last 47 years. Iranian state, despite all these endless propaganda in Hollywood, in CNN, in CBS, BBC, all of them about the mullahs, fundamentalist mullahs who are trying to export their messianic ideology to the state, to the region. Who has started the wars? Has Iran ever shot a single bullet to a single person in the region? Even Iran's help of Hezbollah, Hamas, Hashd al-Shabi, they all have been for defense purpose. Did Hezbollah ever attack Israel one-sidedly and preemptively? Did Hashd al-Shabi do anything against Americans or against even Israel? Hashd al-Shabi fought against ISIS, so the Iraqi resistance force. So there's not a single event in which Iran or its allies have preemptively attacked American interests in the region, while America has always preemptively has done it, from assassinating Qasem Soleimani to the endless sanctions to the 12 days war back in June and July. So I think Iranian state has every right to protect its means to defend itself and its 90 million population.
I heard you during an interview with The Cradle talk about how you think that Trump really miscalculated in terms of just the strength of the Iranian government, and how I'm paraphrasing what you said, but basically how he's actually strengthened the government because the actions of the United States and the actions of Israel and the flaunting in people's faces of the role of foreign intervention has actually kind of rallied the masses around the government. Can you talk more about that?
Back in the summer last year, Israel and American invasion and attack, they really created a rally around the flag. However, with what happened in January, 8th and 9th of January, the situation has changed. And there are a segment of population which are duped and brainwashed by all these endless media operations and psychological operations, especially done from Israel, like Iran International. And there is a sense of confusion because the number of people who died on the streets on 8th and 9th of January were immense. For a country like Iran, the state says 3,000, the opposition now has come. First they said 30,000, 60,000, they were going all the way to 6 million, and then they traced back, and now it's like a haggling. Now they have sufficed themselves with 7,000, which is like a disgusting number game. But America did hit a strong punch to Iranian face. Look at that. As we know, Besant said that they meddled with Iranian money back in Dubai and other places. So they exacerbated the real depreciation from one side and sanctions from the other side, they triggered, they activated the trigger mechanism in United Nations Security Council in September, which added the insecurity in Iranian market, the 12 days war, all these issues, they pushed people on the street. Then I believe that there were operations from terrorist groups close to Israel, especially like Pejak and MEK. And then all American politicians came and said, go on the street, we support you. I mean, which other country you have? I mean, imagine in Black Lives Matter, Putin would come and tell the young people, go on the street, take institutions, the help is coming. Of course, they try to embolden and encourage the population. And the result was bloody. So now part of the population is confused and they may not rally around the flag right now. But I believe that the historical roots of Iranian consciousness and the Iranian historical consciousness is much deeper than this. And still we are dealing with a silent majority. What we hear in the media are those very loud voices, which I think they are being told to be as aggressive as possible, and I think they're like Israeli rule book. And so we hear them so much. Anyone who say we don't want foreign intervention, they say you are like a mercenary of Islamic Republic, you are Islamists, you are like, and we hear them a lot, but we don't hear the silent majority which don't want war. They don't want war, and they have proved that they don't want war in every single opportunity since 1980s. So I think that's number one. Second, more important, Trump's action and Israel action by weaponizing Iranian people, I think created a blowback inside the state. The state in Iran is very multipolar, is very plural, and there's like people who want to make a detente with the United States as soon as possible to be able to lift sanctions and normalize business, and they are the ones who are more realist. But Trump and Netanyahu left no other option for Iranian state, because they said, your population is weaponized, our navy is outside, is an existential threat. What do you want to do? And I think that helped the Iranian state to overcome a lot of its internal hesitations. So they really held themselves to pull themselves together. And one, in the relationship with Russia and China, I think that was a revision of that. We hear a lot of news about how China is helping Iran with cutting edge military technology. Second, what Ayatollah Khamenei said was echoed by many other people in top levels. Ali Larijani was given a much higher role, and he's like a realist, very close to Khamenei. And all these people suddenly pushed the reformists to the side, the reformists who always would find a way to somehow prioritize negotiation with the United States over the necessity of military defense. So in a sense, I think the state has taken the situation much more seriously, and the finger is on trigger. They've taken every measure and are well prepared for war. So as today, the two sides came out of Geneva and they said was a very good round. I think the IRGC in Iran didn't listen to this at all. It still has its finger on the trigger because they know Trump, they know last time before Israel attacked Iran on 12th of June, 47 minutes before that, Trump said, my administration is fully committed to negotiation with Iran. So I think any form of cheating, any form of surprise that Trump administration wanted to have, they already have used it. And so those who are behind the military machine in Iran, they are much more sober than they were back in summer.
Let's talk more about the U.S. role in the recent protests. As you mentioned, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent bragged that he basically caused the protests by deliberately crashing Iran's currency on top of the years-long campaign to destroy Iran's economy through sanctions, which Scott Bessent called economic statecraft. We didn't fire a shot. This was great. He was so happy that, as he said, we caused economic collapse. But there also was the covert role. And recently, the Gray Zone uncovered this clip from a congressional hearing where the head of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is like a U.S. government-funded organization that supports regime change around the world. He was testifying, and he basically talked about the role of the NED in sending Starlink terminals to Iran. And Starlink helps people connect to the internet, basically helps evade a government crackdown on the internet. And this, Iran says, is what helped rioters coordinate with their foreign backers. And watch what happens when the head of the NED starts talking about the deployment of these Starlink terminals inside of Iran.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that we just got a notification that the State Department is actually funding a new program to, I guess, with Starlink. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the State Department, but what I would share is that we've been investing in communication tools over years that allow for information to be sent into Iran, even when internet connectivity is blocked. We specifically began supporting the deployment, the operation of about 200 Starlinks early on.
All right, you know what? I'm going to interrupt you. We better not talk about it. Okay, so
So that's a member of Congress saying, actually, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea for us to talk about publicly how we're helping to covertly fuel these protests in a foreign country.
Second consular of Dutch embassy a few days ago was entering Tehran airport, Imam Khomeini airport, and while they have immunity and they have to go through without any inspection of the luggages, they insisted to look into her luggages. She resisted and finally looked, and I think they found 30 or something Starlink. And now there's like, she left the country after that. She didn't stay. And so it seems that, no, the policy of sending Starlink to Iran continues. And so that's another meddling. So this is an official news from BBC Persian service I'm reading for you. But so that seems that Starlink play a very big role. And I think that was another stupidity of whoever was in the situation room of this hybrid warfare. They have so much confidence in the role of Starlink that the moment they got shut down, they had no plan B. They had no plan B. That's why the heavy part of the protest, the radical element of the protest, suddenly disappeared into the thin air. So, and the state could manage the whole thing in over 2 nights. Whereas I think they really had prepared to continue, take police stations, at least manage to take over a few of the cities in weaker regions. But I think, and they didn't expect Iran to be able to neutralize the Starlink. And it's a surprise for me how Iranians did it. The rumor is Russia helped them to do so. But I think that's interesting. And still are sending a Starlink, hoping that it can help them create a way of communication between the networks they have done. However, many of those networks are damaged as well. My prediction is if something like this happen again, especially in the event of any American military intervention, they would ask another uprising, and you're not going to have an uprising the way that you had on 8th and 9th of January, because that was big. That was like hundreds of thousands of people. They say over 1 million people. I don't know. I'm not here to estimate the number, but that was a big demonstration in its own right. However, this time, I think only radical elements and trained elements will come outside, especially in Kurdish area, which Pejak has been very important, and in Baluch areas and other places. And then through their media operations like Iran International, they depict them as people. So you have trained people, trained guerrilla forces, or as they call it, terrorists, guerrilla, whatever you want to call them, trained in Israel. Many of them trained in Israel. They come, they can take over police stations, Basij stations, IRGC headquarters, maybe 1 or 2 cities in Kurdistan even may fall for a few hours. And then if you tell to the population at large that city of Mahabad, for example, fell into the hand of protesters, maybe you can encourage others to rise. I mean, the model is more like 1990, 1991 Iraq, which led to Intifada Shabaniyah, when George Bush the father asked Shiites in the south and Kurds in the north to do the uprising. They throw tracts from the airplanes and encouraging them. And of course, after that, they didn't support them. So that's another thing which may happen. That's why maybe they're still sending a Starlink, because I think it doesn't make sense otherwise, because Iranians have found ways to neutralize Starlink in specific moments.
What, by the way, do you think Iran needs to do, given what you've been referring to? And we all know, the three of us know this, and many of the people who are watching this, that Western media is totally biased. No matter what Iran does, it's portrayed as the instigator. It's portrayed as this bully, as irrational, lacking restraint. It's not just a lie. It's like the exact inversion of reality, right? When they're always the ones showing restraint, they're the ones who are responding to someone else's attack. But what needs to be done? And it feels like more and more that there has to be some kind of transnational cooperation, because like the West is just picking these countries off one by one. You have Venezuela, you have Cuba, you have Syria, attempt after attempt with Iran. It seems like naive to think that that governments can survive without forming something. I don't mean to sound utopian or naive, but forming some kind of transnational body, because what on earth can stop the West besides something like that?
I've been arguing, and I might not be right, but we are in the minority of voices in Iran. We have been, but because we have no access to mainstream media, we've been arguing since 2020 that Iran needs to get much closer to China and Russia and join BRICS, join Shanghai, and Raisi did it during his time. Ibrahim Raisi had a clearer vision about turn to the east. Turn to the east is a phrase used by Ayatollah Khamenei since, I think, 2017, 2018, but it was never actualized and realized. And the reason for that is the complex, as I said, pluralistic system inside the country. The fact that the state is made of many different blocks of power, and many of them, especially the oligarchs, are leaning more towards the West. The children live in the West. They have assets in the West. Imagine a bit like Russia. And Russia, you had Abramovich and you had other oligarchs who had their heart divided between Britain, because they had their own Chelsea football club, they had money here and there, and the motherland. And I think the state, the Russian state and Putin, on the eve of Ukraine operation, told them, you have to decide. This is not a moment of hesitation anymore. Up until now, the Iranian state hasn't had that moment of exercising sovereignty on its own components. So in a sense, the state should decide between the existence of itself as a whole and the partial interest of its component. And that's why I said what Trump is doing inadvertently and ironically is pushing the state to make that leap, make that decision, because the state understands. I mean, the other way is like destruction. The other way is like endless uprising, riots, city war, and sabotage by Israel. As we are talking today, another factory in Iran was burned. Endless like burning, fire, arson, people dying, and assassinations that the state tries to sweep under the carpet, but we know that most of them are done by Israel. So in a sense, I think depends on this negotiation. If this negotiation doesn't go well, I believe the Iranian state, like every other state which is rational in its core, will take that leap. Many people in Iran will be arrested and will be given the choice of either aligning with the state or not. As we are talking, for example, FT, which I don't trust much, about 2 weeks ago announced Financial Times. Ali Ansari, one of the owners of private banks in Iran called Bank Ayandem, which has, I think, today has about $5 billion debt to the country, to the central bank. $500 million of his assets were frozen in London, and another €500 million of his assets were frozen in Germany. So you can see many of the Iranian on the excuse that he was operating and working with IRGC. So many of these oligarchs who have assets in Europe are afraid for their own private interests. And I think at this stage, the state is pushed to take a final leap and make much more important decision, as Russia did in 2022. Remember, I mean, Russian state was very oligarchic, but then decided that this is not the time to have internal fight and internal partial interests overriding the national interest.
For Iranians who say, we don't want foreign-backed regime change, we don't want sanctions, we don't want the return of the monarchy, we don't want the Shah's son to be our leader, but we do want change, and our efforts to reform have been crushed violently. Women's rights, on the issues of corruption. What would you say to that? I mean, have you seen evidence that this Iranian government has been willing to change in response to not foreign-backed grievances, but homegrown grievances?
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
And thank you again to our guest, Alizadeh. Check him out at his channel, Jadal, which we'll link to in the show notes.
And as always, to support the show, get bonus content, and watch our Friday free-for-all, find us at usefulidiotspodcast.com.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.